find a diamond by scratching on the surface. You'll never find a pearl if you wait out on the shore. That's the way it is when you're looking for the answers. Wisdom lies deep, wisdom lies in the search. Look a little deeper, go a little further, search a little harder. Don't you know you got to grow? You know you got to grow. You know you got to grow. You've got to grow.
Hi there, welcome to Probe, Season 11, which is called Questions That Demand Answers. Do you ever feel that in the 21st century one cannot have any absolute standards of morality? Some people say that there is no absolute truth in a changing world and everything is relative. They believe what is right or wrong is relative to the situation. Reverend Sudhakar is here today to answer the questions and to discuss this matter with Dr. Nirmala Abraham.
We are so happy to have Reverend Sudhakar Monditoka with us once again. Welcome to Probe, Reverend Sudhakar.
Thank you very much, Sister Nirmala. I'm glad to be with you.
Thank you for being with us. Last week we saw what is apologetics and why it is so necessary. This week we would like to see whether it is possible to have absolute truths in a changing world. All human beings seek the truth. They need God, they need hope for the future, they look for forgiveness of sins and peace and answers to their deepest questions. But many of these people think that truth is relative as we are living in a changing world. So at the outset, you tell us what is meant by absolute truth and whether it is possible to know the truth at all.
Well, before we actually say anything about truth, we should first understand the meaning of the word truth itself.
Yes.
I've done some on-the-spot research with professors, research scholars, university students, college students, and professionals. And most of the people did not know what they actually meant by the word truth. And so let me, in a very simple but profoundly technical way, define truth.
Okay.
When I say something about a thing, a reality, if what I say corresponds to that reality, then what I say becomes truth.
Yes.
For example, if I say, Mrs. Nirmala is wearing a pair of glasses. So I've made a statement, and that statement is true because what I'm saying and what I'm referring to, they match.
What you're seeing is what you're saying.
Now, a very simple illustration again. If I say, Mrs. Nirmala Abraham is right now, as she is talking to me, wearing very dark goggles, that would not be true.
Right.
Because that is not describing the reality as it is. So what I'm saying and the reality are not matching.
Right.
So truth is the property of a proposition or a statement, what we say, where what we say corresponds to reality.
Right.
So in a simple way we can say, saying as things are is truth.
Yes.
Saying things which are not is false. So that's why Aristotle, a great philosopher of ancient times, defined truth in some very simple but yet profound terms, and I'd like to share that so that there'll be clarity in our minds.
Okay.
He said, to say what is truth. To say what is not is truth.
So there are absolute truths even in a changing world, things that never change. Right?
Yes, that's the second point I wanted to make. Now, when we talk about truth, many people say, well, truth is a matter of your perspective. So you look at things from
Your
one angle.
perception.
Your perception.
Right. For them, everything is relative.
Relative. And changing. And so to make them realize that that's not how they're actually living, I sometimes ask friends, suppose you come to me and ask for 2,000 rupees of loan, and I give you because you're my good friend.
Okay.
And then you come after 6 months and you ask for another 2,000 rupees.
Okay.
And then when you give back, suppose I say 2 plus 2 from my angle, from the way I'm doing calculations, is equal to 2,400. And you say, no, 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 4 only, right?
Right.
And you will give me back only 4,000, not 24,000.
Yes.
Why? Because 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 4 only for all people everywhere. So that is an illustration of truth which is not changing.
Right.
It is absolute. So when we say truth is absolute, what we actually mean is that it is unchanging. It does not change from place to place, person to person, culture to culture.
Yes.
There are things that change. Our tastes change. You may like idli and sambar. I may like paratha and chicken, or
But coming back to the example that you gave, there are financiers today who give 4,000 and expect 24,000 back because their interest rates are so high. So that is the problem. When there are no absolute truths, anything can become the truth, and then there are no models, there is nothing that is negative, everything is okay, values, beliefs, lifestyles, everything depends upon what you think, and it's relative. So this is called situational ethics. What do you feel about situational ethics?
Well, even those that talk about ethics being relative, they change from person to person, situation to situation, context to context. If we ask them, go to any context, any culture, we'll ask them a simple question. Is it okay if I bring a 3-day-old baby, put it on the table, take a sharp knife, and chop it up into pieces? What answer would you get?
You would be horrified.
You would be horrified, and in any single culture in the world right now, they'll say, that is wrong.
Right.
Why? There is an intrinsic moral sense that we all have.
God has put it there.
God has created us with that moral sense
Right.
of oughtness. It ought to be like this, it ought not to be like this.
Yes.
So those who say morals are relative, they change from culture to culture, they don't understand what they are actually talking about.
Right.
If that is the case, how can we have an international court of justice?
Right.
Now, during the time of the Nazi rule under Hitler, there were terrible things done, for which some medical doctors who did horrifying experiments on live human beings were being tried in the International Court of Justice in Hague. And they constantly said, appealing to the judges, we only did what the law made permissible. So we followed the law of the land because of his absolute power, which often corrupts absolutely.
Yes.
He passed laws in the parliament which were inhuman,
Right.
unethical. So something may be legal, but still you won't say, well, they followed the law and therefore they are right.
Right.
So when those guys were appealing to the law of the land, finally one judge out of desperation said, but gentlemen, isn't there a law which is above the law of the land?
Yes.
What law was that judge in the International Court of Justice in Hague appealing to? It is the law of the Lord, written on human hearts, as we read in Romans chapter 2.
Yes.
So there is a law that God has inscribed on our conscience.
Right.
That is the law of morality.
And it
says
never changes.
It never changes.
I believe once a person came to Abraham Lincoln and they were having an argument, and whatever Lincoln said, this man remained unconvinced. Then finally Abraham Lincoln said, okay, how many legs has a cow got? So this man said, 4, of course. So then Abraham Lincoln said, supposing you call the tail of the cow a leg, then how many legs would the cow have? So he said, then the cow would have 5 legs. So Abraham Lincoln said, that's the problem. Just by calling the tail a leg, it doesn't become a leg. It still has 4 legs.
Absolutely. In
So-
fact, logic and language are also inseparably linked.
Yes.
So this is the logic of truth. Be it in mathematics where we say 2 plus 2 equals 4 and 4 only,
Yes.
and nobody will call me a narrow-minded mathematician.
Right.
In history, if I say Mahatma Gandhiji, the father of our nation, India, was born on the 2nd of October, and that's the truth and there's no other truth, nobody will call me a narrow-minded historian. In science, if I say the atomic number of sodium is 11 and 11 only, nobody will call me a narrow-minded
Right.
chemist.
They can't say you are rigid and your mind is set on something.
You see, in the same way, in the realm of ethics, in the realm of morality, if I say there are certain ethical principles, moral laws, which are unchanging, absolute, because they are anchored in the unchanging nature of God, who is the only ultimately really unchanging being, who can become the anchor of morality. If we try to anchor morality in humans or in some created order, they cannot be the same.
Absolute truths cannot change.
Because there is an absolute being, our creator, the one who gives us the law above the law of the land,
Right.
the unchanging law, which is anchored, based in his unchanging nature.
Yes. If I climb up a tall tower and I just want to jump down from there, saying that the law of gravity has changed, I will still die. Because the law of gravity has not changed. God has fixed it there at creation.
Yeah, it's a
Even-
good point, but I want to make one important distinction between the law of gravity and the moral laws that we are talking about. And that is very critical. The laws of science, like the law of gravity, are descriptive.
Yes.
They only describe what is happening.
Right.
The law of gravity describes that when a person jumps off of a building, he falls to the ground.
So it describes why certain things happen.
It describes what happens
Okay.
and sometimes gives an explanation of why it happens.
Right.
There is a pull,
Okay.
gravitational pull.
Okay.
That's why a thing that you throw up will eventually start
Come
coming
down.
down.
Yes.
It'll fall down.
Right.
So those laws, the scientific laws, are descriptive laws.
Right.
Whereas the moral laws are prescriptive. They prescribe how things ought to be.
Yes.
They just don't describe
Yes.
how people are behaving morally.
Right.
It says we ought to tell the truth. That is a prescription. And now, some people try to argue that there is no God, and they still argue that there are moral principles. And my challenge to such people is, if there is a prescription, logic and common sense tell us that there must be a prescriber. Without a prescriber, you can't have a prescription.
Right.
So without a moral lawgiver, God, you actually can't have moral principles
Right.
which are absolute and unchanging and universal in application and relevance.
Yes. Now people know this, that there are absolute laws, there are absolute truths, they know that very well. And yet they do not accept that. They try to say that no, we don't accept any moral principles which are absolute. It has to change from person to person, from country to country, from century to century. Why? Why do they keep on refuting this fact?
Well, it's not because they don't realize
Yes.
or they don't know, but they are choosing not to accept
That's right.
the truth. That's what we read in the book of Romans, chapter 1, 18 following. People are suppressing the truth, and that's why the judgment of God comes upon such humans. See, what can be known about God? His divine attributes. They are all made obvious, Paul says. Because when we look at creation, the creation demonstrates the nature of the Creator
Right.
to a great extent. So, if we are still denying the truth, it's not because we do not know, it's not because we are not able to see, but because we are not willing to accept it.
So it is your choice what you want to accept it. Now the Bible describes the role of human conscience in Romans chapter 2, verses 14 to 16. It says, "For when the Gentiles which have not the law do by nature the things contained in the law, these having not the law are a law unto themselves, which show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience also bearing witness, and their thoughts the mean, while accusing or else excusing one another." I feel that a world without any absolute morals would be the most horrible world imaginable. If people start making their own laws and their own moral standards, now tell us what would be the effect on people and on this world if that happens?
Well, it will be chaotic. We will not have any basis to live a harmonious life. There will be chaos and confusion. For example,
Yes.
take the traffic rule, which is not actually a moral law.
Yes.
But obeying that traffic rule is demanded by morality.
Yes.
Traffic rules are in place. We all drive on the left-hand side of the road. Of course, in India, oftentimes they come in the opposite direction, and they, instead of taking a U-turn because it means a few meters extra, they come from the right.
Right. Especially in Hyderabad.
Especially in Hyderabad. Now, suppose suddenly everybody begins to think, it doesn't matter. I will drive in whichever way I like. What will happen? Chaos, accidents. The system fails. So, the few who violate are violating the rule. So also in the moral realm. If there are no unchanging, absolute moral, ethical principles that must necessarily come from the source, which is God, who is unchanging, absolute, then there will be moral chaos. Nobody can say, it's wrong for you to steal from me.
Yes. Whatever feels good is right.
What feels good is right. So I feel like stealing from somebody and living, and then if I run out of my cash, I will steal from somebody else. Is that okay? Yet sometimes people say, well, it's okay just for the sake of arguing. Then I would say, is it okay if I steal from you?
And some people say it's in my culture. My culture says so. But then some cultures say love your neighbor. Other cultures may say eat your neighbor. So is it okay to be a cannibal just because that's your culture?
You see, one professor was trying to teach that there are at least some ethical principles which are universal in application, absolute and unchanging. And one student of all the students was constantly arguing, no sir, morals are relative. They change from situation to situation, person to person, context to context. There are absolutely no absolutes. And the professor said, are you absolutely sure that there are no absolutes, absolutely? And the guy said,
That's an absolute statement.
That's an absolute statement. So even to negate an absolute, you have to come up with
absolute
an
statements.
absolute.
Yes.
That shows how absolutely absolutes are inescapable. And then the professor, although he caught him on that, the student again goes back to the same and continues to argue. Finally, he was one of the most brilliant fellows. So the final exam came, he graded all the papers, and deliberately the professor said, you get a 0 for this. And so it's a fail grade. 0 and fail grade. And he stands up and protests. Sir, how come? I've done everything well. And you have given me a 0 and a fail grade. And the professor coolly says, well, when I looked at your answer script, I just felt like putting a 0 and an F grade.
Yes.
Because morals is a matter of how you feel.
Yes.
So that's how I felt. And the guy says, no sir, It is not like that. You see? That's the point, gentlemen, the professor said.
Only when it pinches you, you realize that there are absolutes. Now, my next question to you is, are all moral truths or moral principles equal in nature, or is there any kind of hierarchy in the moral truths? Like, for example, God said, love your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, love your neighbor as yourself. Now, is it that the first one is higher up in the hierarchy than the next one? If you put love your neighbor first, then loving your God can come secondary to that. So would you say that there is a kind of hierarchy?
When two moral absolutes come in conflict, then in such situations we have to choose the one which is of a higher level than the other.
Right.
There is what is called graded absolutism,
Right.
where the absolutes are graded. Some are higher, some are lower.
I think this is the same principle that was applied in the case of Rahab.
Rahab.
Yeah, in the
In
Bible.
fact, many people actually show that and say, oh, no, even according to your Bible, there are no absolutes. You see?
Rahab told a lie, saying that there is nobody in my house.
House.
Yes.
Even though she told a lie, God actually rewarded her. So,
She
never
saved the
say-
lives of God's children.
You see? So, there we see a similar case of two absolutes coming in for conflict.
Again, coming into the 20th century, during the Second World War,
That's right.
when Hitler was killing all the Jews, there were many people who were hiding the Jews in their homes, and
Absolutely.
they would tell them lies, saying there's nobody here, and so many lives were saved like that. So I think it is the same principle.
So, when it is clearly two absolutes coming in conflict, then we have to choose the higher one and break the lower one. So God is more concerned about the life of human beings than one other law.
Some people say that man's perspective changes even though there are absolutes in place. For example, a few centuries ago, man thought that the earth is stationary and the sun goes around the earth, so the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. But now we know that it is the earth that goes around the sun. Would you say that the absolute truth is there, but it is the perspective that keeps changing?
Our knowing the truth is one thing, and truth itself is another thing. In fact, now we know that everything in the universe is actually in a constant state of motion.
Right.
So, at that time they did not know the truth. Now we know the truth. So it is not the truth that has changed, but it is the knowledge of the people of the truth that has changed.
I find it very interesting that in the secular world, people use phrases like robbing Peter to pay Paul. They say gospel truth. They say something and then they say, don't quote me as the gospel truth. So that means they know that the gospel is the truth. It is accepted in the secular world. But then how can we actually live by gospel truth, gospel values and standards, and where can we find the absolute moral code? Is it in the one who said, I am the truth? It is only Jesus who said that. In John 14:6, he said, I am the way, the truth and the life. He said he is the only path to God. So is it in him that we can find this moral code?
In fact, it's a very interesting thing that you have just quoted. Jesus says, I am the truth. He has made a perfectly logical statement. What you and I should do is to see if that is the truth or not.
Yes.
If Jesus is indeed the truth or not.
Then we need to follow everything that he said.
If you discover that he is the truth, then you have to follow, because he is the truth. He is the foundation of the truth.
So if he is the truth, then everything that he said is the truth, and you have to follow that.
Absolutely. In fact, if you read John's Gospel, same John's Gospel, chapter 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, which is a title for Jesus. So in the beginning was Jesus, and the Word was with God, Jesus was with God, and Jesus was God.
God.
And all that exists because of him.
Yes.
Nothing exists apart from his creative activity. So John presents Jesus as the creator God who came into the world and lived in flesh and blood among us
Yes.
to reveal true humanity, to reveal true divinity. So, if Jesus is the truth, the moral life that he exemplified becomes a perfect example for us to follow. The moral teaching that he gave becomes the solid, unchanging moral
Yes.
code for us to follow.
In the secular world, I find that the rich and famous and powerful, they have no moral code, and even if they break any moral code, they go unpunished often. But in the Bible, we find that even the most important people like David, King David himself, when he broke the moral code of God, he was punished severely. So
Absolutely.
it's not just David, even Moses and others. So we have to follow the moral code, even though it is difficult, it is for our good. So it is very comforting to know that there are absolute truths which never change, and our God never changes. And it is good to know that we can function properly and the world will function as it should when we follow this moral code. Thank you so much, Brother Sudhakar, for being with us today. We've really enjoyed this episode with you. God bless you.
Thank you, and God bless you too. I've just enjoyed being with you and engaging in this discussion on
Thank
truth
you.
and absolutes.
Friends, the very laws of science are founded on the existence of absolute truth. So let us not be carried away by the lie that everything is relative. God's laws are eternal and they are there for our good. Read the Bible and get to know the Lord Jesus, who alone said, I am the truth.
Wow, wasn't that a gripping episode? To say that there are no absolutes itself is an absolute statement. If there is no absolute truth, no standard of right and wrong that we are accountable to, people would be free to do whatever they want. Murder, rape, steal, lie, cheat, etc. And no one could say those things would be wrong. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions on this topic, do write to us at writetoprobe@gmail.com. Tune in every week, same day, same time, and get to know the answers to the questions that have plagued you for years. So till next time, stay blessed.
You've got to grow.
Is God a delusion? Or is he really there?
We cannot be uncertain about everything.
People ask, where is God in all this?
There's a prescription, prescriber should be there.
What arguments can you give from different fields other than the Bible to prove that God is not a delusion?
We have to now decide whether Dawkins is in delusion, thinking that God is a delusion.
There is no proof to say that God does not exist.